Hey, welcome back to the Life Unscripted podcast with Roosevelt. Today, I have an incredible guest with me. His name is Alex Moore. Am I saying it right? Alex is the podcast producer, One More, and he has a story to tell us. Alex been telling me that he's gone through a powerful transformation that, like many of us, can relate, especially for those of us who've been navigating transition from 20s and 30s. Is that correct?
Correct.
And he want to talk a little bit about how personal habits, social relationships, and even his own life choices have evolved. And then also about how making small, consistent changes like perhaps quitting drinking, improving in your diet and exercise, and doing so, have you found not only personal growth, but also deeper, stronger relationships? So I think, Alex, you have a lot of wisdom to share. And I'm really, really excited to dive into our conversation today. So before we start, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. And let's do this. So
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rosabelle. I'm really excited to be on the show and have a conversation with you. Yeah, and I'm so excited to talk about the kind of the journey that, everyone goes on in life, but, I specifically have been on, and then specifically how it's led me here to this moment. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be on the show.
awesome, awesome. So Alex, tell us a little bit more about what is this journey you talk about and what led you to make these transformative changes in your life? Like what was the driving force behind the process?
Yeah, I think, as the birthdays come and as you start to age and life starts to get more serious, we all kind of realize that the habits of our younger days you're not able to keep those up, right? As when I was younger, I think I did things that every young person does, or a lot of young people do, when it came to just hanging out with my friends, going out to get drinks, throwing parties, going to parties, things like that. And, I had a lot of fun and I built a lot of social relationships, and I'm very appreciative for those relationships and all the things that I did. So, don't get me wrong, I don't necessarily say that I regret those actions, but when I got to 29, 30, 31, I started realizing that that kind of lifestyle was not something that I wanted to keep up. And so I made conscious decisions to take breaks from drinking, from partying, and decided that I needed to make this change if I wanted to be the person that I wanted to be, right? So you make those changes, but there's all these factors that are telling you why you shouldn't do it. I shouldn't do it because maybe my friends won't want to hang out with me anymore. Maybe they won't invite me to things anymore because they think I'm doing this. And so I had all these thoughts and all these fears. And ultimately, while they were trying their best to hold me back, I pushed through because I wanted to do it for myself. I wasn't doing it for anyone else. And I started to realize there was kind of the split in me. It was the old me and the new me, and then in between was all those fears and all those things that were trying to push me back into the old me, but I was trying to push on to the new me, the person who, you know, exercised more than drank, who ate better, and spent every moment of the day trying to become a better person. And so when I realized those gaps in that middle person, the fears and all of that, I I realized that I wanted to tell the story of that person. This person who had fears, this person who wasn't sure who I was, right? Who was scared of quitting but scared of not quitting at the same time. And so I actually started writing a narrative story about that person, and ended up turning it into a podcast called One More. And basically just had a lot of fun with it. I have a very great group of friends who let me record them because I'm a podcaster. I'm a podcaster full time, been doing it for 10 years. And so I bought a bunch of lapel microphones for them to wear, and, mic them up and actually threw a party for all of us, which I know seems kind of counterintuitive, but I'll get there, and recorded us all one night, and then used that audio footage to tell the story of this podcast using real life footage of my friends, but then using this kind of not fake, I mean, fictional narrative of this person who I was fighting against, the old me, the new me, and the person in the middle. And so I told the story of that person. So, Yeah, I mean it's been really fun. I feel like I'm, maybe not on the other side. I think those fears always stay with you, but it's something that's just a part of life is change, and ultimately how we adjust to it is who we are. And well, yeah, I told that story, and I'm just I'm I'm just I'm very grateful for the things that, have given me the opportunity to be where I am, right? And ultimately, like, we can regret some of the decisions we made in the past, but it's made me who I am now, and I wouldn't be here talking to you if I hadn't done those things. So that's been very exciting. So I know, long-winded answer, but that's kind of where I'm
Hey,
at now.
that's awesome. Let me tell you, I was listening very well to you were saying, and I think in a way we all can find each other in a sense in you. Like I was thinking about my youth, my
Yeah.
times and all those things, and several things. We're still learning. We keep learning. We keep discovering ourselves. So that's pretty important. And then the next thing I was gonna mention to you, did you ever thought that, or did you ever find yourself, because I did, that okay, you had fear about something, but you still were going despite the fear. Did you ever felt that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's in life you have to weigh decisions on based off of what the potential outcomes are going to be always, right? So, and it's kind of been like a theme that I've thought about recently, but it's like you always have to choose what's going to be hard in your life.
Like
So,
choose your heart type of thing?
yeah, exactly. So, like, like you see this all the time on the internet and stuff like that, but it's like, okay, so if I keep drinking and partying like this, my heart is not being who I want to be. That's really hard. Ultimately, if you're not living up to what you feel like your potential is, you live with that every day, right? If I do kind of stop and slow down this, then my heart is that, I can't go out with my friends, or not that I can't, but I don't get to experience that same fun elements. And, the part of my life is almost disappearing in a sense, right? So that becomes the hard in that aspect. So which one am I going to pick? Though, and it seems obvious when I say them out loud like that. Like
Right,
it seems like very obvious, but it's still, there's a difficulty in it because it's like part of you is almost dying in a sense, right? You've
right,
moved on from this version of you that led you to where you are now, that led you to all these fun times, all these fun stories that I have from my youth, and all this exciting stuff. And this person who, in your 20s, you truly have this level of freedom. And we addressed this in the podcast too. In the episode, one of my friends goes on, tells this great speech about how he appreciates his 20s so much because he had this freedom he never had before. He was able to experience being an adult and doing all these amazing things that he could never do before when he was young, right? He could,
right,
do all these, like go out, meet all these new people, go to concerts, go to events, and you just socially you bloom in that era. But now that he's 30, he realizes I can't do that anymore. I'm not the same person.
right.
My responsibilities have grown exponentially, and that's okay. It's
Absolutely,
okay.
it's okay, yes.
It's okay, like that has changed. But that acceptance is difficult. And I found it difficult for a while, and that's why I wanted to tell the story of one more, because ultimately the name too is just like there's always one more party. There's
One more
always
party, one more drink,
one
one
more
one
drink.
more of this. Right,
Exactly.
absolutely.
But
Well,
you
a
have
couple
to find
things.
that you have to find that point. Yeah,
A couple
absolutely.
things I picked up from what you were saying is, do you realize that it takes courage to do what you're doing? It takes courage. And the other thing I was gonna say to you, when I was in my 20s, I felt like I was on top of the world.
Yeah, for sure.
But then I don't know if it happens to most people, but when you start like 30s, I'm 42 now. You're like, I was not.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel better now but I think it's a very, how would I say this? It's a part of growing, because there are some studies that says that our brain doesn't start growing. I mean, our brain's still growing up to age 23 or something like that. So it's still developing. That's what I'm saying. Not that
Yeah.
it's growing. So there's a lot of things that need to, and then all the hormones that come from, being a teenager. And you're right, making that transition from like being at home with parents and like having that, and then suddenly you being released to this world where like, okay, here's the world, to me. But then you're right. Then you come to the conclusion like, actually, there's responsibility. There's a
Yeah.
things that come with this. So that is great. I really really love talking about these things. And then how about I feel like what you're talking about, it's actually a healthy approach. Healthy approach in a sense because what you're doing, what you were doing is like being able to like open yourself up to your feelings. Okay, how do I feel about this? Not just keep going and going and going, right? You have mentioned that you were able to make small consistent changes. Can you tell us about what are those changes and how do you make them to be able to stick?
Yeah, I think you come to a point where you have that realization, right? That it's like, okay, this isn't flying anymore. I need to make the decision, or I need to make the choice to change. And I've done this so many times. I mean, we all have those moments. It's like you just have that moment. You're like, oh, like you see yourself in the mirror. You whatever it is. You realize you're doing something that isn't about yourself, right? And I think so many people, when they make that decision that they need to change, want to jump into it at 100 miles an hour right away. And to me, I've done that as well, and it just never works because it never lasts, right? You go in and you try something and you're like, oh, I'm going to do this full blast, full send, and then it just dies out in a week, right? So I was like, okay, you can stop drinking cold turkey, right? Which I fully support too. And I did that for a while. But at the same time, I was like, hey, if I have a beer with my friend or something like that, that's okay. It's that you don't I don't need to get upset at myself for doing that, right? So
Exactly.
still like go to a bar, something like that, have a drink, but don't go crazy, right? Have one or two, something like that. So I would do things like that. And then also I was like, okay, I need to start exercising. Like this is the truth. I need to start exercising. Like I can't just not exercise anymore. And so it was like I was like slowly like, okay, let's go to the gym a couple times a week. Okay, let's go to the gym 3 times a week, 4 times a week. So it started just slowly ramping it up. And then, if you miss a day, that's totally fine. And then I was taking walks. I think walks are huge in this process too. Like walks are so underrated, to be honest. Trying to hit that 10,000 steps every day. But if you don't hit it, that's totally fine. You hit 5,000, that's okay. But being proactive about, okay, I'm going to go out and walk. And I'm in Portland, Oregon. Portland is known for its rain. It rains a lot here, but still just trying to get out when you can. And I mean, if you do those three things, you drink a good amount of water, I mean, your life's going to change pretty drastically over time.
Over
Don't
time.
expect the changes in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Honestly, if you do all those things, you're probably going to see some changes in 3 weeks, but realistically, it's going to be slow. And so just starting to introduce those things because I knew that I wasn't drinking anymore, but you need something to replace that, right?
Right.
You can't just sit at home and not do anything. You need something to replace it. So whether it's going to the gym every day, walking 10,000 steps, doing stuff with your diet, whether it's, food prep or whatever it is, those are the things that you need to really, really put in place. So that's what I found was working for me over the last couple years. And those are definitely the things that I've changed, that have helped and have helped kind of influence me where I am now.
I think that what you have said is really, really powerful because small steps actually it's what leads to big results. And those are it's good. It's good because you know how many people perhaps, our listeners, people in general, wonder like how I'm gonna do this. And you're right. We want to be able to make these changes. And in fact, I had a little talk the other day at like a solo podcast that I was talking. I think I shared with you that I work in neurology. And our frontal lobe is a part of our brain that actually works that being able to do what you're doing, making those decisions and also the gratification. And then so by you doing those things, you're actually working your brain. And that is also important to keep. See, like you're saying, health is not so much, but it's about keeping your health, keeping you healthy, living longer. There's so much that you can derive from those things. I also counsel my patients
Hmm.
about I tell them a lot of times about exercising, right? But I always say, hey, what I don't mean and these are like older people. I don't mean go to the gym and lift weights and do this. No, brisk
Yeah.
walks, 30
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah.
Because if you start there, you do it maybe next day or the following week. I'm not only gonna walk 30 minutes, I'm gonna do 45 and next and you're right. And being in nature and actually connecting I mean, it does so much good, not only for the physical body, but also for your emotional and mental health. So that
Yeah.
is awesome. That is great. Thank you for
Great.
sharing that. It really
Of course.
it speaks volumes. And
Yeah.
now the other thing I wanted to kind of ask you about, I know that at one point you felt you were concerned about how your social relations perhaps might be affected by these changes, right? Especially like, for example, when it came quitting. I mean, you're not the first person that tells me that because you worry, are my friends are gonna like me? And even, oh, they want to hang out with me,
Yeah.
stuff like that. Tell me,
Yeah.
how did you navigate those fears of losing your friends, or or did those relationships actually end up evolving in any way? I want to hear about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I'm super excited to hear the walk thing, by the way. That's fantastic. I'm retraining my brain. That's awesome. Also, what helps with a walk, a 30-minute walk, don't bring your phone. I love that too. Just
Yes.
really just being alone in that moment. But to the relationships, yeah, that's it's crazy. It's almost difficult to talk about in a sense because like I was talking about, you have those anxieties, you have those fears, and it's because like you're like, okay, you're so pumped that you're going to change yourself, right? You're so excited to be different and to be a better version of you. But then you realize what it's going to take. And it's that first Friday night, and someone texts you and asks you to go out. And you realize that you have to say no. And then it's in that moment when you realize what it's actually going to take to accomplish this. And we're all getting older. Our jobs are more serious. Our relationships are more serious. Ultimately, sometimes that Friday night going out, it might be the only time you see that friend for the week. It might be the only time you see that friend for the month. And you say no to it. When are you going to see them next? And that hits you, and you're going through kind of what, and you're going to say no maybe the next time. And like who knows what's going to happen. And so and then it's all in your head, but you're sitting at home,
Let me
realize,
ask you this. I'm sorry to
yeah,
interrupt, but
no,
have you ever heard of the fear of missing out?
oh, FOMO, yeah,
Uh-huh. Sounds
yeah,
like it.
yeah,
Were
for
you having
sure,
some of that fear?
for sure, yeah, 100%. But ultimately, you have to realize that what you're doing is best for you, and that people who are close with you, people who understand who you are, people who have respect and love for you, are going to be okay with that.
Exactly.
So that's kind of where it comes to, but it's a long battle to get there.
It
It's not
is.
easy. It's not easy.
And then you might have to be willing to lose some so-called friendships.
Yeah, for
But the
sure.
good friends, they're gonna remain with you. They
Yeah.
always do. It has happened to me.
And yeah, and that's kind of why I also made the podcast, because it was a good way for me to, open up and talk to my friends exactly about how I was feeling. And I think the main character in the podcast, whose name is Alex, who is a version of me, is fighting this battle too. Like he is worried that he's going to lose all of his friends. He's worried that things will never be the same. And yeah, that's me. I mean, I know it's not true, but that is me, like going through that in a metaphorical sense.
That is so, so, so awesome. What a great message. Um, I think, can you tell us, I want to ask you, why, tell me a little bit more about that episode.
Yeah.
Like, I know you told me, I guess you have shared about what inspired you, but tell me a little bit more in that. I want to hear.
Yeah. So I'm very, very lucky that I have a group of friends who, like I said, will let me put microphones on them and record them at a party. So I had this vision of a party where I was, essentially, I don't want to say playing a character because it was really me, but I was building up this kind of person who I was changing from, right? This person who was, one, like really obsessed with drinking and partying, which again is not me, but was a version of me at one time, and wanted to tell the story of this person losing that feeling, this transition. And so I listened to The Daily from the New York Times. It's a daily podcast, tells the best news story of the day or the biggest news story of today in a narrative. And so I've always really loved that podcast. So I was like, oh, I want to make something like that. But then I'm also I like to read quite a bit, and there's a short story by John Cheever called The Swimmer. It's one of my favorite stories, and it's about this character who starts off as this young athletic guy who has everything. He parties all the time. He has all this money and is really loving his life. But then by the end of the story, you find out that this isn't the case at all. He's lost his family. He's an alcoholic, all this stuff. So I was like, what if I told those stories at the same time? Like use the daily to tell a story of like The Swimmer by John Cheever. And so I wrote this character of Alex who loves partying, loves hanging out with his friends, but then slowly goes through this party, and you kind of start to realize that, he feels like he's losing all of his friendships and all his relationships, and because he's not partying his parties aren't the same anymore. So that's kind of the story of One More loosely. And then I created it from real audio from my friends. So there is a real part of this that is nonfiction. Like these are my friends live telling stories, but then that's thrown into a fictional narrative that I wrote and created about this version of myself that isn't real, but did exist in a sense. Like to me, it's almost like a documentary about myself going through a transformation, right?
Right.
So yeah, and it's just fun. It's funny. It's only 28 minutes long. It's short, but it's kind of I've been working in audio production for the last 10 years in podcast production, and I just like making passion projects. To me, it's like if someone were a writer and they were just writing, things for fun on the side. This is what I've done on the side of my actual career in podcast production, and just telling the story of myself going through this transformation.
That is so, so awesome. Listen, I had to say this. When I started listening to your podcast, I was really impressed. I loved it. There's a sense of like, I don't know, like it's like a movie, and you're like seeing, and then it is very vivid. I remember
Thank you.
listening like the birds chirping and this different sounds. It's like, wow, this is
Mhm.
so cool. Like I had to talk to Alex. I had to put him
Awesome.
in, and I have to, people need to hear about this because this is the coolest thing. And it just makes me realize, there's so much creativity. There's so much out there, and it's
Yeah,
also kind of cool when you're talking about how you came up with the idea. I don't know if you're like me that it's the middle of the night, you're sleeping in the middle of the night, like at 3 o'clock in the morning.
totally.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
like I am so thankful that we have these phones now where you're like, okay, start
Yeah.
recording the ideas and like what am I gonna do? So yeah, so I'm so happy that we have that capabilities now, I can only imagine in the times of who knows who and like, oh my God, I gotta get up and turn that lantern to who knows I don't know.
To write with a quill.
Exactly. So but now it's like my phone is right there. I wanna be honest with you. I think I have the tendonitis I have in my hand. I know now why.
Yeah,
My
yeah,
phone sits on the left side, and it's kind of heavy
yeah.
because it has also an extra thing where I keep my cards in there,
Nice.
and so I do this to reach out. So
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
making that movement. See, I discovered the problem now.
There we go.
That's all it takes. Coming
Yeah. Coming
to
on
an
the
episode.
podcast. No, and I think you bring up a good point with the middle of the night. And I had a note on my phone that's like so long. Like if I showed you, it just scroll of all the
Yes.
notes I had for all the ideas for the podcast. But I think when we're talking about creativity, I think one thing that the audio medium needs is just more creative stories, and it's such a great medium that to create kind of any kind of story that you want to tell, because it's easy for people to do, it's easy for people to get into, and then it just allows for so much experimental thought and experimental creativity in podcasting as well. And so that's kind of what I wanted to do too with this podcast, is just try new stuff that I don't think really people are doing, like, and just have fun with it, and just be
Yeah, exactly.
creative.
I love impromptu stuff. Like I'm always been like that too. Like just be ourselves.
Exactly.
Just talk. That's what we do, and not be like, well, don't say this. Kind of. That is so, so awesome.
Yeah.
Wow, there's so much I think we can all take from having this conversation. I mean, we've been talking about, how, starting with small steps, being patient with yourself.
Yeah.
It's easy sometimes to want instant results, but then how transformation takes time. And then, pick up one thing that you want to get better at or focus on it, and then kind of go from there. And then I think it leads to where you are right now. It leads me when you do those things. this is what I have experienced. My creativity actually booms. It's
Exactly.
just like, because you have clear, your mind gets clear. You got like, and then also you have a lot more motivation. You have
Exactly.
all this motivation. What about this? How about that? It's like, I never thought that I would be doing this today. Never. I
Yeah.
mean, because I was like, I work in the medical field, how different is this?
Yeah.
But then I realized, like, I like talking to people, like sharing stories. And I wrote this book that talks about courage. I mean, this topic aligns so well, and the fears and all this. And then one morning I was like, hey, what if I just create a podcast? So I start like talking about my book, and next thing is like, and one thing leads to the other. That the key is, if we let fear paralyze us, like to the point like, okay, we never do anything, right? But if you open your mind to possibilities,
Yeah.
and then also knowing that, okay, kind of like what you've done, your little small changes, it would also lead you to roads that you did not know, or areas of your life you did not know existed. I don't know if you knew how creative you were until you started creating this type of you had ideas of how to do it. Perhaps you were doing this for your work, but not for your own self, in the sense of like having fun. And I think I mentioned this to you in another conversation we had, that if we love what we do, we don't have to work one day in our lives. We just, and that's what I do. If we just kind of see the fun in everything we do, it's just, that's, life becomes a lot easier, because life is difficult, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But then we can make it easier.
Yeah, and I totally agree with everything that you said. I mean, I think if I hadn't made some, incremental changes, then I wouldn't have been able to tell the story that I was able to tell through One More and through this podcast, because ultimately to me, I saw it as kind of the, I don't know, like the culmination of everything that I'd been doing. And if I gone through all that, then I wouldn't have told the same story, right? It wouldn't have been the same story, and it would have been different. And I don't think I would have had the the motivation, the discipline, working late at night after I got off work, editing audio, writing, all the stuff that I had to do, creating the piece is difficult. I mean, I had like probably 13 microphones of people mic'd up for this party's 5-6 hours. I mean, do the math. I mean, we're talking about 60-70 hours of audio that I had to listen to make this and cut. And I don't have a team. It's just me, and I'm just doing it
Exactly.
for fun. And I think that level, I don't think I would have been able to get there if I hadn't, kind of made those small changes. And and I think I would have been sitting on it for a long time, and even longer. And so I'm very appreciative of those changes and where I am now. And I think it's kind of ultimately a culmination of, like I said, of everything that I've been through in the last few years.
That is awesome. I see your story, a little bit of my story in yours, because I'm the same way. I have this material for this book that I wanted to write since, like, I
Yeah.
had the idea that I wanted to write it like since I'm 16 years old. And
Wow.
earlier last year, I'm like, okay, this is the year. I got to do this. And to take care of a family, to do this, to go to work and actually put the time in, write and write. It takes a lot, for the people who do this, that knows what there's a lot behind, the working and putting together audio, the editing. People who are familiar with podcasts, when you see the final product out there, I mean, it's awesome, it's beautiful, but then what, the hours, to put the sound and everything that match out,
Yeah.
it's work. It's
It's
a lot
work.
of work,
Yeah.
and you have to be willing to do it. And but it's one of those things, like, again, if you love what you do, then you're willing to put that time, right?
Exactly.
And also, like, having to listen, that's another thing I do. I do a recording and I listen to it, because I need to make sure that everything flows, and a little detail, and it's not like,
Yeah.
throw it
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah. For
But
sure.
I think it helps us. I
Of
think,
course.
in a way, everything, it's amazing how life, I find it really, really interesting, the fact us doing this type of work, it actually helps us
Mhm.
to actually be better people, because it actually helps with actually being disciplined.
Agreed.
You know,
Agreed.
having to, like, okay, from this time to this time, it's helping me a lot. From this time to this time, I'm going to be doing this recording. For this time, I got to do this. It actually gives you it gives your psyche a, like a sense of direction, purpose. Okay, what are you going to be doing? And also having that routine. Routines are actually important.
Agreed. Agreed.
And something that I tell people, having this, working actually our minds in this way actually helps with cognitive decline. I mean, we're all going to have, we get old, we get cognitive, but the brain, it's like a muscle. If you don't work it, it's like anything else.
Yeah.
So love it. I mean, I was just telling, I think it was my husband was telling him that, ever since I'm doing this, and I don't know, I probably mentioned it to you, I'm not sure earlier. Ever since I'm doing this podcast and doing creative work and like learning about other people's stories and this and that, it's been kind of complementary to what I do. It's different though of what I do on a daily basis. But what it has helped me to do, actually, it has sharpened my focus. So when I'm at
Yeah.
work, I'm actually able to be like, it's kind of like fully in it. And I'm just like, it has surprised me actually.
Awesome.
Like
Yeah.
the amount how, so hey, I am so thrilled for you, so happy for you that you have found this path. And it's always good when you find people who feel comfortable in their own skin, doing their own things, like doing
Yeah.
what you're doing. And I also like the idea that we do it, and yeah, we kind of do it well for other people, and it's okay. I mean, of course, at the end of the day, if they like it. But I'll tell you something about me. I always feel like our jobs or our creative endeavors, they have, I mean, everything has an audience, right? And you're going to have an audience that's going to love what you do. But then you may have another one that don't. And you know what? That's okay. And to be able to be okay with that, that's where I am right now. There's
Yeah.
going to be people who's going to like what I say here. There's people who are not going to like it. And that's okay, you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
But to be able to feel that way. There's gonna be people who are gonna like my book. There's people who's not gonna like my book, and
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
okay. And not letting that to be the factor where you don't do things in your life, because if you do, then you'll never do anything.
Yeah. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah, what an interesting conversation, huh?
Yeah. 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 Thank you so much, Rosabelle. It's been great to talk to you, and I really appreciate it. And yeah, I think the journey continues. Like, like you said, like I think that's another part of it too, is just that aspect of thinking about, what other people are gonna think when you, especially when you release something that's creative too. It's
Yeah,
just like that worry. It's like, okay, are people gonna like it? And ultimately, I think I had so much more fun during the creative process than I felt like I've had since I released it, because I've just been like so concerned about people's thoughts about it. But I think that's another step, is I gotta let that go and
absolutely.
realize that there was things that I learned on the journey that are much more important than whether or not someone gives me their approval ultimately.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
That is so great.
Yeah.
What is like, I'm not gonna say the biggest advice, but like a something you want to, if there was one thing that our listeners can take with, what would that be?
One piece of advice from me. Man, this is a good question. I think it's like, if there's something that you've been thinking about wanting to do, whether it's the smallest thing in the world or the biggest thing, whether it's like going on a trip, or whether it's just getting a gym membership, or just like starting to take walks every day or something. It's just like, for me, it's just like, go do it for 15 minutes. Just give it a try. Give it a try for 10-15 minutes, and then just see what you think about it. And like, I think just like we said earlier, like, those small incremental steps are the big thing. So like, if you want to go to a gym, just say, I'll go check out this gym for a little bit, just see how it is. If you want to take a big trip across the world, just take a look at some flights, start doing some research, just start doing those little
Just do it,
things.
right?
Just go for it, but don't worry about, you don't have to be all in right away. You don't have to buy your flight that day. You don't have to leave that day. Like, just start thinking about it. Start
Right.
taking those incremental steps that'll get you there, right?
Start
So,
somewhere, right? I
yeah,
love
yeah,
that. I
yeah,
really do love
yeah.
that. It is definitely clear that you are on a path of continued growth and success for sure. And I know our listeners are definitely going to be inspired by your story, our stories. Thank you
Thank you.
again for being on the podcast today. I really, really do appreciate you. And to our listeners, I want to thank you for tuning in the Life Unscripted podcast with Rosabelle. like I always say, if you found that today's conversation was valuable, be sure to share it with your friends. And I want you to follow Alex on social media for more of his journey. Where can they find you, Alex? Tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. You can follow me on Instagram, Blue Sky. I'm at More of Alex, so just my last name, the More of Alex. And then you can hear the One More podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Check it out.
It's awesome. So listen, until next time, remember the transformation starts with those small, consistent changes. So keep moving forward, and I'll see you.
Awesome.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, Rosabelle.
Thank you.